Michigan has a quarterback commit in the class of 2022. We're going to break it all down. Clayton Sayfie here with EJ Holland. We're from the Wolverine.com. Full coverage of Jayden Denegal's commitment over there. Use the promo code BLUE60 to get 2 months of our premium content absolutely free. But EJ, let's discuss this. He had a workout here today, which is Wednesday, with the Michigan staff in Ann Arbor. Was able to earn his offer and wasted absolutely no time in committing to Michigan. 6'4", 215-pounder, a big-bodied quarterback here. Again, in the class of 2022, rated as a 3-star. He's got a big arm. What else do you know about him, and what else do you like about Jayden Denegal's game?
Yeah, he actually played this season at north of 230 pounds. So he's trimmed down a little bit. You know, when you watch him at that weight, you know, a lazy comparison is Byron Leftwich just because he's a bigger, strong arm quarterback. But, you know, Denegal did do his best this offseason to cut weight. He's actually at 213 right now. So he looks, according to his trainer, he looks more comfortable, you know, throwing the ball. The mechanics are still there. And that's what you see with Denegal. Everybody's talking about him as being a high ceiling guy, but he also has a high floor. He trains, again, with Danny Hernandez, who's one of the top quarterback trainers in the country. So mechanically, he's fine. Like you said, he has the big arm. He is a guy that has a high IQ. He's going to be a contributor to the quarterback room in general. So I think he has a high ceiling as well. I do feel like he's more of a guy that, you know, will likely sit behind maybe a guy like JJ McCarthy for a little while and maybe be a starter later on in his career. But I think Jayden is what he is. I mean, he put up some really nice stats, albeit against a little bit lower competition out in California. He put up some nice stats. He has that arm. He has the mechanics. He's cutting the weight. So I do think he's a high ceiling, high floor guy. But I mean, as far as expectations, I do think, you know, Michigan wanted to take a quarterback this cycle that had a little bit of a unique athletic profile. And so even though, you know, Jayden's not a Nate Johnson type where Nate was running, you know, a 10-5 and had position flexibility, he does have a big body and a big arm. And with the weight trim, he has a little bit of athleticism to him as well. And it's a weak year at the quarterback position. Like I said, they just wanted to take someone that they felt was more of an upside guy after landing J.J. McCarthy, and as they make a big push for Dante Moore next cycle.
Yeah, and that's where things get interesting. So the quarterback board has been crazy in 2022, as you mentioned. You know, trending for a guy, and then a guy trends somewhere else or commits somewhere else. You mentioned Nate Johnson being one of those guys, and there's been a few of them. They've expanded the board in the last couple months, expanded even more again today, and then he decides to commit. I guess, how did this all go down in terms of him committing? I mentioned he was on campus for that workout and obviously impressed the staff, and to a certain extent at the same time, you know, looking at, you know, how he's a 3-star and he's not that elite guy. He's not the J.J. McCarthy of your class like he had last year, but at the same time, you got to trust the evaluation of Matt Weiss, Jim Harbaugh, and the rest of the guys that were at that workout.
Yeah, that's the thing with this cycle in particular. Like, Michigan's coming off a pretty bad year. You know, I think that's pretty fair to say. On top of that, you know, that you had COVID last year, so a lot of these guys, you know, had shortened senior seasons. They had spring seasons. You know, in California, it was more of a shortened spring season. Coaches weren't allowed to get out on the road because of the dead period. And, you know, as I always say, and as everybody knows, I like to get out on the road as much as possible to see guys live because that's the best, you know, way to evaluate a prospect. And so once Michigan was able to get him on campus and see him live, they trusted their evaluation. They offered, and obviously he committed same day. In Jayden's case, you know, that he didn't have a ton of other, you know, viable options. But again, I think Michigan really liked what they saw at the throwing session, and they're going to trust their evaluations, and they've been trusting their evaluations. We just, you know, talked about Aaron Alexander, who Michigan picked up over the weekend to start in-state linebacker, a guy that's only other offer was Marshall. They went ahead and took him. They took C.J. Stokes, a 3-star running back out of South Carolina, who didn't have a committable offer to home state South Carolina, and didn't have a ton of other big name programs in the mix, but they trusted their evaluation there. So this staff, is all about their evaluations, and they're going to take guys regardless of what stars are given.
Yep, and it's definitely interesting as well. Ratings are a little bit different and maybe a little bit off this year as well, and even last cycle as well, due to the fact that reporters and specifically the national guys didn't have the opportunity necessarily to get on the road as much. And for a kid, in California and some of these kids in certain states, they didn't play a season last year, so that's important to note as well. Last thing before we go, I guess, to kind of wrap this up, Michigan seems to have been, on that trend of taking one quarterback per cycle. Do you feel like that's going to be the case going forward here in 2022 as they now just kind of push their chips in the middle in 23 for Dante Moore? Or, do you think that they could possibly be on the lookout for a guy that, pops up on the board maybe later on in the process?
I mean, with the way quarterback recruiting has gone this cycle, I think Michigan is just happy to have a guy on board, especially since the board was dwindling down. A lot of quarterbacks make their decisions pretty early as opposed to other positions. So there weren't a lot of options on the table. They obviously struck out pretty hard with Nate Johnson, who was favored to end up at Michigan, and then delivered a pretty big gut punch committing to Utah. They brought in Connor Harrell for a visit, 3-star prospect from Alabama, who I really like, but didn't seem like they moved the needle too much there. Justin Martin, who was committed to Cal, made it to campus, but again, didn't look like they moved the needle enough there. So I think right now, it's just the lack of options at the quarterback position, with it being a down year. I think you just take Jayden and move on to 2023, unless a guy like Nate Johnson wants to reconsider later in the cycle and come back for a visit just because he offers position flexibility. And it doesn't necessarily have to be Nate Johnson. Maybe another guy that pops up later in the radar that has quarterback, wide receiver, quarterback, defensive back flexibility. Maybe you take another guy like that as more of a quarterback athlete. But I think you move on to Dante Moore for sure. He's the big fish for next cycle. Borderline 5-star prospect out of Detroit King. Michigan is making him kind of that crown jewel like they did with Will Johnson and Donovan Edwards. We'll see if Michigan can, seal the deal with Dante. He just picked up an offer from Ohio State, which makes things very, very interesting. Obviously, both Donovan Edwards and Will Johnson had Ohio State offers and still ended up at Michigan. Regardless of how their recruitments played out, they both had those mutual offers. So I think with Dante Moore, it'll be interesting to see how his process plays out. He's originally from Ohio and grew up a little bit of a Buckeyes fan, he admitted, but Michigan is now home. He's very familiar with the program overall, and I think the depth chart has to be pretty appealing to him as far as a path to early playing time.
Yeah, and Devin Gardner's his trainer, so he can set him straight a little bit. And, also when you speak of J.J. McCarthy, now you go to, Jayden Denegal. If you do land, and it's not a guarantee, but if you do land Dante Moore in 2023, altogether, that's a hell of a 3 classes in a row at the quarterback spot. So that's important to, and then 2 before that was Cade McNamara. So they're doing a, decent job at the very least, each year at the quarterback spot when it comes to recruiting, and we'll see how the rest of this cycle plays out. We'll obviously, have some time before we see exactly how the Dante Moore in 2023 quarterback recruitments plays out. But for now, Michigan has Jayden Denegal in the fold as its 2022 quarterback commit, now part of the number 16 class in the country, and right on the verge, really, of a top 10 class if they get 1 or 2 more guys here. It's all numbers at this point when it comes to the national recruiting rankings, but a long ways to go. Follow us at thewolverine.com for full coverage of this commitment and Michigan football recruiting going forward.